Hello, hello. Happy St. Patrick's Day and happy more than halfway through my self-imposed YouTube video challenge. Yay. Oh, okay. So the specific carbohydrate diet was the main diet that I used to try to treat my ulcerative colitis before I had my colon removed. And I have a lot of opinions about it. I wrote two actually blog posts, blog articles about the specific carbohydrate diet, based on all of my own personal mistakes and lessons learned. I actually don't even know, are people still doing the specific carbohydrate diet? I know that it was popular 15 years ago when I was doing it for definitely for IBD, but also for autism. And it's very similar to the GAPS diet, which is more autism focused. But I was 14, 15 years old. This was still in the day of this was kind of pre-social media, where email listservs were still a big thing. So I was part of the Yahoo Groups email listserv for the Breaking the Vicious Cycle specific carbohydrate diet group. And it was interesting because most of the other people on the listserv with me were twice my age. A lot of them had kids my age who had IBD, and yeah, definitely the way that the book that it's over here on the shelf. I'll get it. We'll get it. Maybe. I think it's right. Oh yeah, it's right here. This is the book that talks about the specific carbohydrate diet for IBD and for autism. It was published. When was it published? Bro. It says copyright 2007, but then it says 12th printing 2007. Why am I stupid and unable to figure out when this was originally written? Wow. Wow. That's... well, whatever. That's fine. Anyway, the this, as I say in the articles that I wrote about the SCD, the woman who wrote this, Elaine Gottschall, she was really ahead of her time in terms of her scientific, mechanistic explanations and rationale for the explaining intestinal diseases and the relation to gut bacteria, because this was written long before the crazy spike in interest in the microbiome. Obviously, it's everybody's heard of the microbiome now and everybody's paying attention to their gut bacteria, and it feels very, very normal and very not cutting edge. But this was written at a time when it was not even really on the horizon. So that piece is very impressive and very interesting, even just as a historical snapshot. Um, but, and, you know, I'm not going to remember this well without looking back at like what I wrote, but basically the dietary recommendations grew out of clinical observations that this team had in treating pediatric celiac disease, I think. And, you know, that sort of blossomed into a mechanistic theory, which blossomed into more specific dietary recommendations, which center around specific carbohydrates. Wow, the name tells you what the diet is about. Imagine that. The theory is basically that in a damaged intestine, the microvilli that are responsible for producing enzymes to break down complex carbohydrates. One moment. Just the usual animal chaos. Those microvilli that are necessary to break down complex carbohydrates are damaged, so therefore they are not able to break down complex carbohydrates adequately, which feeds pathogenic bacteria, which further damage the intestine, and then it is a vicious cycle. Wow. So that is the theory. And, you know, I talked about this in, I think, my video on Friday. The diet that I tried before this one was the raw vegan diet, and all of the rationale supporting those dietary recommendations were very vague and kind of moralistic, and just like, these foods ferment in your colon and that's toxic and that does this. Like, basically just making unsubstantiated claims, which, you know, me as a naive 14-year-old, I didn't have a way to like vet that. I just trusted it and took it as truth. But by comparison to that, having an actual like mechanistic explanation for what was going on, where I could like kind of understand the pieces and how they fit together, I found this far more convincing and very compelling, and it made sense to me. And so I really latched onto that. And of course, having an online community of people who also, you know, took this ideology on faith and were following the recommendations, like, that made it even more compelling. And unfortunately, that resulted in me really hanging on to this diet for a lot longer than I should have, which is certainly not my fault, because there was no, you know, as with basically every other dietary framework or ideology, the ideology does not make allowances for people for whom that diet might actually not be the answer. So there was nowhere in the book that said, this is the point at which you decide this isn't working, try something else. The book did not say that. Instead, it would be like, if you're still having symptoms at this point, just go back to the intro diet and do that for longer. And did not tell you what to do if you were already doing the intro diet and still having problems chronically. Oh my gosh, this freaking cat. Please stop. Chaos. Okay. So, that flaw is not unique to the specific carbohydrate diet. Obviously, it's a flaw of basically every fad diet or therapeutic diet, or, well, I shouldn't say every therapeutic diet. The ones that are like, I don't know, non-guru led therapeutic diets, that are like I think there's the I forget the acronym, but it's like the anti-inflammatory IBD diet or something. And there are publications about it, and I think the various IBD like official foundation websites mention it. And to past Alyssa, and probably to a lot of other people who are used to the kind of ideological messaging around guru type diets, these other therapeutic diets really feel like they're lacking something. And what they're lacking is the quasi-religious framework that leads you to believe that this is some kind of miracle cure. And it's that quasi-religious framework that can trap people in ideologies for a lot longer than is helpful for them, which is what happened to me. So yeah, again, I definitely don't blame myself, but I just know better now. And definitely, if you are somebody who has any kind of health issue that you're trying to address via a diet or some other protocol or lifestyle or anything that has a kind of like worldview ideology around it, like just be aware of that. Just be aware that like if the ideology doesn't make allowances for the possibility that it might not be the answer for everybody, you could get trapped. So there's that. On a more like technical level, as far as the diet itself, the kind of glaring issue with the scientific basis for the diet is that the rules are incredibly strict, and the community, again, 15 years ago, it could be completely different now. And, you know, if you have any exposure to how it is now, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Or if you have any links to like modern people who talk about the SCD and using it for their own issues or whatever, I'd love to hear that. But, you know, as from what I experienced of it a very long time ago, everybody in the community was very strict, very rigid about the dietary requirements, which is basically just make sure that you are not ingesting any complex carbohydrates. You can only have monosaccharides, which is glucose, fructose, galactose. And the like this was even borne out in the terminology that is used in the book. Like the food lists were labeled like legal and illegal. So you could have like legal foods and illegal foods, which, you know, it basically means the same thing as allowed or not allowed. But the connotations of legal and illegal are kind of more intense and lend itself to a lot more like moralization of the dietary requirements. And again, just the like strictness and rigidity. Like people would go on their like go onto the listserv and be like, oh no, like I ate some illegals yesterday, which like it's so weird, the like little mini linguistic microcosms that you can get into with these different diet communities. But this one I don't think was particularly healthy, and certainly was not for me, because I just naturally have a very like, I'm predisposed to being rigid about things and predisposed to like moralizing things. And so yeah, this really fed into all of my existing unhealthy patterns and exacerbated them a lot. And all of that would be fine if it was true that the tiniest, teeny tiny little amounts of XYZ would significantly harm you, and on the flip side, avoiding and being very strict would allow you to heal. And that theory is very at odds with the composition of foods, which, like, for instance, most fruits, which are allowed on the diet, do have small amounts of sucrose in them, which sucrose is a disaccharide. And like other allowed foods, like beans are allowed later in the diet. Those obviously have small amounts of starches in them. They're just like, and I go through this in more detail in the article that I wrote. I don't have that to reference right now. I'll link it in the description. But it's a little bit disingenuous to like cultivate this environment of like, oh my God, you ate like one gummy bear. That's so bad and you shouldn't have done that, when like you could probably get the equivalent amount of sucrose in like, I don't know, a banana or something. Again, I don't know the specific like amounts or levels, but like when you're being that nitpicky and that strict about things, it just doesn't make sense to do that when the foods that are allowed naturally contain the things that are being strictly prohibited. So yeah, that's obviously the biggest issue with the diet itself, as far as like an internal consistency issue. As far as like external validity, there are a lot of reasons that the specific food list and guidelines of the SCD could be helpful to people with IBD and other issues. It's almost certainly not for the reasons that were elaborated in Breaking the Vicious Cycle. So therefore, like, it doesn't really make sense to use this as a framework. And I probably wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It seems like other frameworks would be more useful, even just a basic elimination diet. But yeah, that's basically that. Yeah, and again, like with any other diet, like I obviously believe the success stories, and there are a lot of them for the SCD. It just, you know, the fact that something works doesn't necessarily mean that it works for the reasons that it stated. So something working does not validate the framework and rationale and like worldview and ideology of the thing. It just means that the recommendations worked for somebody, and it could be for totally different reasons. So yeah, that is what I have to say for today on the specific carbohydrate diet. I hope everybody has a good rest of your St. Patty's Day.